today's session and who will be watching this recording later on YouTube. I'm really pleased to continue our sessions about digital transformation. My name is Lela Machaidze. I'm PMP Professional Project Manager, and I'm in this field for almost 18-19 years. I'm working with the public and private sector. I'm really passionate about anything related to future of project management, any skills required for the project managers. And I take one step ahead. I invite famous and thought leaders, experts in their area, especially in digital transformation, and take their brains and all the knowledge and talk about the importance of digital transformation and trends in digital transformation. Okay. A little bit about the logistic of today's session. We will be recording, and we are recording this session. So if you were registered and you were not able to attend the meeting, you still have an ability to watch the recording on YouTube. This session is live streamed on Facebook, and we will share the YouTube on the LinkedIn as well. Please feel free. Actually, before the session, Saskia, my honorable guest, and I will introduce her in shortly, we agreed to have this discussion session as live and as interactive as possible. So I really want to encourage each of you, feel free to post your questions in chat. So we will be addressing every of the questions. So we will try our best. So feel free to post your questions. There are no right or wrong questions, so you are welcome. So now this is my honor to present the guest, Saskia Listle. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
I want to say as good as anybody not living in Germany can, so
okay, you can correct.
It is a very German name, so you're very much excused.
Okay, thank you. She's consultant, expert, and speaker on holistic digital strategies and emerging technologies. Actually, I was thinking today that she's the first digitally native representative on my session. So I'm really pleased to welcome you on my live session. Welcome.
Hello.
How are
everybody.
you today?
I'm really good. Thanks for having me here. I'm excited about our chat. I think it's going to be a great conversation. Yeah.
Yes. And I hope that our audience will be asking questions and asking the questions that are relevant to their jobs and their interests. So just to open the door for our discussions, digitalization is here. We talked that it's not only the digital transformation anymore, but we are in era of digital evolution, and it's really fascinating era. So I will start our conversation with a question. Why is digitalization so successful today? We can say it's successful, and why does it influences so much on our day-to-day lives?
I want to say ask 10 experts and you get 10 different answers on that question. My take on it is I pretty much believe that digitalization, or let me start differently. I want to say the core of digitalization is about building connection between people. It's the technology that makes it possible. It's the technology that enables it. But what it actually does, what the technology allows us to do, is build connection between people. And if you look into successful business models, which we consider in the digital realm, be it Facebook, Amazon, Google, it always connects people with each other directly or indirectly. And we as human beings, we're striving for connections. And as this makes it so much easier to get in contact with others, to have a connection with others, that's the reason I want to say why digitalization is so successful, why it came upon us, I want to say, so strongly and so profoundly in the end. And that's also why I think it won't go away so soon.
and the connections that it's building, the digital transformation, it enables our connections even with a higher quality and with the higher speed, right?
Yes, exactly. It makes it easier. It makes it in a way more efficient, although I'm really careful to use the word efficiency.
Saskia, are you
when
here?
you talk.
Have I lost you or am I lost?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me? That's a good start. Hold on a second. I can hear you perfectly.
So I'm back, I think.
Ah.
Issues. I'm sorry for that. There was
No
some
problem.
Issue. Okay, we were talking about the digital transformation successes, and the next question I want to ask is that you tend to say that digitalization is probably more work for the boardroom than for IT department.
Mm-hmm.
How come? Why is that?
Yeah, we tend to make it part of our IT department, and especially in the boardroom, where we say, okay, now we need to do something with digitalization. And so we need all the technology stuff to do it. So let's put it off to the IT department. They will do it. They will take care of it. When in fact, digitalization, coming back to the connection part of it, is actually so encompassing. And that's also where I want to say my holistic view on it comes in. You have so many different things to consider. It's not just done, and I guess all of you have made that experience. Somebody says, okay, we're going to put up a computer in the corner, and then we're digital. And now we're working in the digital realm. Turns out, this is not at all, well, I want to say this is just putting us up at the starting line, right? This is not even getting ready for the race. Because somebody needs to use that computer. Somebody needs to know what to do with that computer. Somebody needs to know how to use that computer. So there are so many human factors in it. There's a lot of peopling in technology, I want to say, that you need to encompass in all of that, that you need to include into your thoughts about it. And if you just make it part of the IT department, you're basically setting yourself up to fail. And I guess also all of you have made the experience that when the boardroom talks about something, about a plan, about a strategy, and gives that off to one department, something gets lost in translation, because naturally every department speaks a different language, right? And we all have made the experience that talking to IT guys can be quite of a challenge. So there even more gets lost in translation. And I'm not making it the IT department's fault, the lost in translation. That goes both ways. But that is where I personally want to encourage everybody who sits on a boardroom and who makes the decision that we're going to get digital now in a company to think more about the deeper influences this will have on the company. Because as I said, digitalization will not get away. We're passed into that. Like there has actually been a famous quote from the chef, the boss of Deutsche Telekom, German telecommunication company, who said in the 90s that the internet is not there to stay. I want to say 20 years later, we know it will stay. We will not get rid of it so soon. And if we call it Web 2 now or Web 3 in the future, we will still have some form of it, some form of platform that allows for that connection. And so you really have to know what you want to do with it. And that is not part of the IT department to decide that. That is part of the boardroom to decide that, and to carry that decision and to carry it through the whole organization, let it really ripple through to every minor and major role in the company, to know what we're up to and to know how digitalization can support us in that mission. So I yeah, I strongly advise my clients to make digitalization a boardroom effort and not an IT project.
And actually, I also strongly believe that it's not only one department's job to be responsible, because the transformations usually involve the whole aspects, including infrastructures, peoples, and the operations, and depending on the segment. How you differentiate the digital transformation in, for example, startups, in more mature companies or corporations, in public sector is completely different. Yeah, it's a different scale. So how you see this differentiation, how they're addressing their challenges?
So if I want to be quite pessimistic, they're handling it all equally bad. The thing is, we tend to connect startups with that hip environment, and they know what to do. And they're that, you said the term earlier, digital natives, and they'll just nail it. And that'll be, we especially the old corporations have that thinking of, we can't even compete with that, right? We're way too far behind. When in fact, a lot of the startups are actually in exactly the same trap than the big corporations, just looking at it from another angle. Because startups also don't necessarily make the decision what is right or wrong, what makes sense and what doesn't. They use technology on everything. They throw technology on every problem that's out there because it's hip and it gets money. And well, you probably all heard of that study that came out a few years ago that put AI in your pitch deck and you're 25% more likely to get more money, right? Yeah. So they play with exactly the same buzzwords without actually needing it or knowing what they're doing there. The traditional companies, like the middle-sized companies, corporations, all of that, they're more reluctant to try technology. But then again, they run into the same trap once they decided to do it, because then there's also a human dynamic into it. If, I don't know, the board or CEO of a big car manufacturer meets the CEO of a big pharma industry, both fairly settled, both fairly traditional and conservative, then one throws out a buzzword and the other one thinks like, oh, am I missing out on something here? And so you have that snowball system where he goes back and says like, oh, actually, we need to put in a buzzword of your choice here, without actually knowing why, what the purpose of that would be, how that would really bring the company forward. So yeah, it's there's a lot of throw technology on a problem without actually looking at the problem itself. And I guess that's actually a point where the project management also comes into, because I guess you also made the experience that a problem is just taken and thrown to project management and they'll solve it no matter how. And that will give you technology and then you'll manage it, right? You probably had that experience as well.
Absolutely, and especially it conflicts with the mindset, agile mindset that most of the companies now are utilizing. Agile mindset is low technology, high touch approach. So one of the biggest, actually all the agile teams are encouraged, and one of the principles of agile is that the agile teams should be using low tech and high touch, more connections, more relationships during the execution of the project. The same, I believe, with the digital transformation. So digital transformation is one of the type of the transformation. So just to go back to our topic about building resilient digital strategy, what do you mean by resilient?
So for me, resiliency or being resilient is actually it's a mindset. It's a skill. It's not a trend. We tend to treat it as a trend right now, but it's actually the ability to adapt flexibly to what's coming. It is the ability to not freak out every time we change the road. But it is knowing where you're standing, knowing your principles, knowing your purpose, and standing in that purpose with a deep trust in that. And from that security and from that trust in yourself or in your organizational core, knowing and having the trust in that whatever comes, you're going to be fine. That's my definition of resilience. How would you define it?
Interesting. You mentioned today I was participating in one conference. By the way, I forgot at the beginning to say that Saskia and we decided to dedicate our event to in support of Ukrainian families. And on our event description, we indicated that UNICEF link. We would appreciate if you can donate and support Ukrainian families. So it was our mutual decision, and thank you, Saskia, for this. So we dedicate this webinar to Ukrainian families. So during the conference that I attended, it was 24/7 big event for the project managers for 2 days, 24/7 project managers globally, up to 35 project managers united, and we conducted non-stop conference, online conference, and most of the speakers which I attended, because I obviously need also to have a rest, but those events which I attended, most of them talk about the trust. And you mentioned trust also, and it's like, it becomes like buzzword. We need trust, we need trust, we need trust. How do you build trust with such a multicultural, such a devoted teams, and especially with the when you are creating the digital strategy, which you believe should be resilient and trusted, that strategy, because obviously, if the strategy is not trusted and you don't have buy-in from everybody, the chances that it will be successful is very low, right?
Right. No, that's a core belief. You need to get everybody on board. You don't need to get everybody convinced. I want to be clear about that, because especially in big corporations that have grown by tradition sometimes, where you have like 10,000 or 100,000 employees, you can't get everybody on agreeing on one and the same thing. That is not how that works. That is also not what you want. Diversity plays a big role in that, but maybe we can get back on that later. But you need to be sure about what you're doing, and that is part of the leadership role, I want to say. It is important to know where you want to get the boat, what is the right direction you want to steer your boat to, and you need to live that. You need to have your principles straight, you need to have your integrity and your values straight, and you need to live that, you need to show that. And that, for me, is what is kind of the basis of trust. People need to be sure what they can expect from you. But that's also a point where a lot of the companies struggle, I want to say, because telling it is easy. Showing it, especially in a big corporation, might not be so easy, especially with the growing structures that you live in, and especially with all the history that you bring into. How do you deal with that? It's not easy. It's hard work, but that's the basis, I want to say.
So it's simply said, but hard to accomplish.
Exactly. It's very easily said, and you see that. Example, apart from the digitalization topic, look at VW, the Volkswagen, who had that big scandal, and who still, like years and years and years after, struggle to keep that trust up with clients. Right? It took just one incident to destroy all the work that they've done into it, which then again makes me at least think, how big was that trust lived before, or how much was it just like words, empty phrases that they threw out there. I see them doing a lot of work to rebuild that trust, but it's really hard for them, and they still have a hard time to go. So, and a long way to go. Yeah.
And trust is in a different levels. It's trust with their customers, trust with their employees, trust with the shareholders, and image trust, and everywhere. So
exactly,
it's really, really hard. It's really hard. Just to get to the point where we started, and we thought it would be interesting topic for our audience, and I believe our audience is here for that specific point. Let's put to start it with what the digital strategy standard strategy should entail, in your opinion, and how to make it resilient. Well, I know it's not easy and one way, but just try to summarize your experience with different companies, because I know you have done so many consulting work, you've done big projects, so just share your experience with us.
Yeah. I tend to not give like the one size fits all, because I believe that isn't out there. Especially if you talk about like programs, which programs to use. A lot of my clients come to me and say like, hey, can you tell me what programs to use? I'm like, no, not yet. We need to start at another point. And that's what I want to say is the basis of where to start. It's really figuring out, what do you want to do with it? And actually that involves stripping the whole technology part aside for the beginning, thinking about what do we want to achieve. And that is completely like soft results. I want to say we might want to have a better connection to our customers. We might want to make the lives of our employees more easy. We want to reduce the numbers of hours employees put into a process, for example. And just that formula, that sentence, as I said it now, that does not involve any technology. That is at the beginning very much, where do you want to go? And actually, that is the most difficult part for companies. When I say, why do you want to get digital? Why do you want to include technology? What most companies start doing is telling me about the functionalities that they want to include. That's the wrong way to go. That's the wrong way to start. That is included, but at a later point. You really have to start to, what's the big hairy goal, I want to say, that you want to achieve with it. And when we figured out that, when we know where we want to go, then we can include technology as a tool. It's a bit like, I know it's always that same example, but I actually think it's really good. Technology being compared to the hammer, right, in your toolbox. You don't start off looking in your garage, what can I do with the hammer? You go around and say like, hey, actually, maybe I want to build a box where I can store your stuff. And then I look in my toolbox and say, okay, I have my nails and I have my hammer. I need that to build the box. All the digital tools that you will include in your process are the hammer and the nails. They're not the box. And so that's, I want to say, the most important thing to understand in the beginning. That's the most important thing to encompass throughout the whole process. It's never about the technology. Technology is only the enabler. Once companies understood that, and once companies really figured out what they want to have, the rest of the job is pretty easy, because then they have that North Star where to run to, and they can actually easier judge what to use, why to use it, how to use it. And that's actually my work is nearly over, I want to say. Because once that is figured out, and once we have that structure, we know who to include. Companies have, I want to say, a feeling how the rest should be planned out, how the rest will work out, who to include, all of that stuff. Yeah.
It sounds that, for example, for the change management, you usually do any big transformations, it doesn't matter, digital transformation or organizational transformation, any big transformation requires some very solid vision and the goal for the change. So it's the same with the digital transformation as I'm hearing, right?
Yes and no, because why I struggle to say a clear and vivid yes is I don't actually think they need a vision. Why do I say that? Because if you work with digitalization and if you work with technology, sometimes you're also dealing with innovation. And innovation, you don't necessarily know where you end up. You don't necessarily know where you go. You're working in that gray area, in that big blobby thing. You don't quite know how you got in there. You don't quite know where you get out. It just is there and you'll have to navigate that in a way. So you don't quite know where you're going. And that makes it hard to have a vision. But that's where I also want to come back to the purpose. Because again, if you're rooted in your purpose, if you know that, it might actually not matter if you end up here or here. That is just a minor deviation from the way. But you need to have that purpose, and that needs to be clear and strong, and that can lead to a vision. Yes. But in general, yeah, I do agree with you on a general track. Yeah.
From the technical and just practicality standpoint, who should be included? What do you think? Who should be included in digital transformation, strategy development, and who should be taking the lead? And should there be any lead for this process at all? What do you think?
So in a digital transformation process, frankly, everybody, because everybody will either be part of the decision or part of the result. That does not necessarily mean you need to have a big company meeting where 100,000 people come together in one town hall meeting and talk about stuff, and you need to agree on one thing that fits everybody. But what you can't do is, and that's where the strategy part comes into, you can't just decide on a strategy in your boardroom, in your ivory tower, and then ripple it through and hope everybody will fall in line. That won't work. So I want to say you need to figure out on a strategy level where you want to go. And there we come in with the purpose again. You need to know, why are you setting up that strategy? Why do you want to achieve that? And basically then sell it to the people, but also be open to get their feedback, because they're the people working with your decisions. Thinking, for example, start with your secretary. Ask your secretary what she would need or he would need to have their lives easier, their day-to-day lives. Is it a computer, or is it maybe just, I don't know, a fan in the corner because the office is so hot? So that's also where the strategy comes in, with the purpose of not making it about the technology, because we tend to think we know what our employees need. We tend to think we're making their lives easier with technology, when in fact we don't know it because we rarely ask them. So I want to say the strategy is definitely a C-level decision, a boardroom decision. They need to give the direction where the ship is heading. But they need to be open, and they need to be interested in the opportunities of others who are part of the process in the end. And that could, for example, be that they do a survey, just collecting, what would you think makes your life easier? Or having an innovation team that comes together where everybody can come, like, for example, I've seen that in a company. They had an innovation team meeting once a month at a fixed point of time, and whoever wanted to come to that meeting had the chance to. Didn't matter if it was the CEO or the janitor. Whoever had an idea could come in there, and that were discussed. They came together, they collected the ideas, and then decided on the ideas and made them happen. So digital transformation needs to include everybody. The direction where to go in general is C-level decision. Yeah.
What is the ideal duration for, what do you think, for this fast changing era, the strategy, for how many years it should be?
I want to say digital transformation never ends, because what you just said, it is a fast-paced world. It is a fast-changing world, and what we'll learn today is probably like the knowledge of the day before yesterday, tomorrow. So I want to say there's no end point to it. But of course, you need to navigate in a way the change willingness of people. If you go to them now and say to them, yeah, well, we don't know when this will end. We'll just see where we go, and they'll go off screaming and never come back. So you need to have some form of frame to it. So what I normally suggest is that you give the idea that from now on, we will be an open and innovative company. That gives room for the change that happens on a long term. And in that change, you have little pockets of little projects. You don't do it all on one. You have the great vision, the great strategy, I want to say, how this could look like, where this could go. And then you start off with one project, and then you do the next one, and then you do the next one. And then basically, you're in one big change process. It never ends. For the little project, well, of course, it depends on the size of how big that project is. I want to say the frame shouldn't be longer than a year. Although you should also be prepared that in that year, you might change your little plan like 3, 4, 5 times. And I guess, especially as a project manager, you know, if you're playing on such a long scale, you will never get there. You will never be where you plan to be at the end of that year. So, but a year is a good amount of time. People can imagine a year, people can touch a year, I want to say. It is an amount of time that they can grasp, that they can understand. The number is a number that they can understand. They have a reference point and they get an idea. So yeah, it shouldn't be longer than that, what you communicate. Yeah.
So as you explained to me, now I envision the digital strategy as a like rolling way of planning. Every year you refine it and just make it more flexible to take into consideration the environmental factor that is happening around. Exactly. But as you mentioned, some of the projects and programs are such a big scale, they continue for 3, 5 more years because it's such a deep, big transformation for the global companies in the different branches in different countries. So it's not an easy path there. So it's pretty complicated.
It is. It is. And actually, I like the idea, the general idea of thinking in Scrum there. I'm not necessarily a big fan of how Scrum is transported today. There's a lot of like labeling, which basically turns out to be a waterfall Scrum principle. But the general idea of saying we have an idea where we're going, we know what we want to create in the end. And I actually like the example of creating a boat. When you do Scrum right, you don't know what you will end up with. You know what you want to do. You want to move people from one side to the other over something that is water. So you start off with a little phase, and maybe the first thing will be just a floating something, right? It takes the person from one side to the other, job done, fairly short amount of time. Then you reiterate and you say like, okay, actually floating thing, fine, but we need something to secure people. So you build a little boat with little walls on the side, yeah? Next iteration, job is done, you get from A to B. Then the next thing you say like, actually, you know, our clients tend to be more wealthy and they expect some comfort to it. So let's build the next boat. It has more comfort on it. Yeah. Third iteration, still does the same job, brings people from A to B. It's just the features that you tweak over time. And so with each iteration, you get further and further towards a product in the end, but it always does the same job. Mm-hmm. And I like that example very much, because that's also how I would see digital transformation to go. You know what you want to do, which technology you use, and you will hear me say that a lot. When you work with me, you will hear me say, okay, we'll leave the technology out the room for the next 3 hours. And that leaves up for a bit of a surprise sometimes. We're like, hold on, but we hired you to do that. But yeah, that's the idea. Know why you do it, what you want to achieve. And then we can go and iterate and iterate and iterate, make it better, make it bigger, make it more useful, get rid of problems that we encounter along the way. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Actually, the example you just gave me reminds me just one of the recent projects we were working about DCC. We had one contract with one of the hydro companies, and we wanted to help them to build the DCC. So when we examined, they needed this smart, the simple structure, easy, friendly to use, with all the procedures written and all the folders arranged and the access rights and everything. So we recommended that, but the management of the company, they said, no, we want the fancy digital tool, because our one of our vendors has the same very fancy digital tool. It looks so nice. And when we looked at the price, when you look at the price of this software, it's so high. Why do you need this if it's doing the job, like moving you mentioned, just to moving you from one side of river to another side of river? If you don't need, and your goal is to move from one side to another, do you really need it? Do you really need to waste your finances? You waste your time, because the tools that and the technology you'll be implemented, it really needs lots of time for trainings. And now we come to the component of the people. So it requires different skills and different knowledge. So what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I lovingly call it shiny object syndrome. And it is actually pretty fascinating. You deal with so many power structures in transformation processes, in change processes, and people tend to overlook them, or they don't acknowledge them. They don't plan with them. And that is the most, I want to say, dangerous part. And so, yeah, as you mentioned, like one company has that. In the worst of cases, that is even a competitor. So we need that to stay in the market, to stay in the, and so you run from product to product, and you never really go to the core of your problem, why you might not be better than your competitor, or why your numbers keep declining and declining, because you never look at the core.
I see.
On a human level, I do understand that, because that is frightening to look at your mistakes. That is like actually turning your vision towards what's going wrong and where you might have failed. And that is frightening. And that takes up bravery to say like, okay, no, we're actually looking into this. And especially if you look into bigger companies, if you look into how business is taught at business schools, that is not what they're teaching. They're not teaching that bravery. They're not teaching that vulnerability. And that is also where you come back to the human component again, where it's all about humans. Why these projects work or don't work. And I want to say, there is a discrepancy in the stories we tell about leadership, in the stories we tell about projects, and the stories we tell about change, all of these stuff. especially with the leadership, we tend to tell that story of that one big hero who brought us into the land of milk and honey. When things go right, by the way, if things don't go so wrong, so it's either the team or there's like an external factor that brought us not to win or to succeed, whatever. But we tend to strive towards those histories. We tend to listen to them. We tend to repeat them. And just a recent example, you can think of him what you want. I'm not making a judgment about him as a person, but the stories we hear about Elon Musk right now, the same pattern. There's that one hero that brings a company forward, an idea forward, an innovation forward, and it completely neglects why he can do that, why he's able to do that, which is all the people that work with him on that vision, with that work, that support him in that idea and in that vision. But that's also how we then tend to make decisions, because how can that one big hero make a wrong decision on a strategy, on a plan, on a project, on the way to go? And changing that takes a lot of courage from the leadership position, because then they have to give up that power that is invested by them just by their sheer existence in the story they're telling. And I want to say, especially in the times we're living in right now, this is very hard. You see a lot of people struggling with giving up that power. But that's also where change gets blocked and where innovation gets blocked in the end. Because we still tend to cling on to being a manager and being in power over somebody, when in fact what we need are leaders. Managers deal with the process. Managers make decisions on a process. Leaders lead a change. And we tend to confuse these two.
A few weeks ago, I had an interview with a very interesting guy. He is from Canada. He's the author of PMI ACP preparation book, Mike Griffith. Maybe you know him. And he presented very interesting model of leadership, actually. The world is now in the era of servant leadership, but he said that I envision that in the future, in the close future, we will be transferring not to servant, but shared leadership model, and it will be so interesting we will observe it. So. Right. I want to encourage, first of all, I want to thank you, all of you, for attending. And also I would like to encourage each of you to post your questions to Saskia and ask any questions about the digital transformation and resilience. Actually, for me, so far, the resilient digital strategy sounds where in strategy there is clear purpose and clear answer to the why. It sounds like Simon Sinek's why, and it to me sounds, as a project manager, as a 5 why tool. So this tool can be used for the strategy development. What do you think?
Simon Sinek has a point with his why, how, what. If it has to be that concept or another one, I don't want to judge that, because I think it resonates with people who might not have an access to it, but it doesn't resonate with others. They have another access to the idea. So whatever works for you, but I definitely think he has a point there. How business is made today, we tend to run towards a goal that we didn't set. We tend to run towards being better than our competitor, and our competitor sets the numbers without thinking, why don't we even be better than him? Or why don't we think about in a completely different a direction and go for a completely different market. So we tend to be driven by others. And just now that I mentioned it, that makes up for an interesting discussion when you talk about data-driven communities and companies. But I'm not going to sidetrack that conversation now. That leaves up for another hour to talk. But we tend to be driven by something else, by an external goal. And being driven is a very passive role, when in fact what we want to do is become active in the change. We want to design the change so that it fits us, because otherwise we'll be still running after each other for the next 50, 60 years. And that's also where we tend to run after trends and have that feeling of restlessness, because the world changes so fast and we need to catch up with it, and we need to be on top of our game every single time, which is impossible in today's world. You can't play on every field. So we need to change our way of thinking, or I want to encourage people to do that, to think about why they're doing what they're doing. What is their purpose in life that goes for an individual? What is your compass, your purpose as a company in being? What good do you do? What do you give to society? What do you give to your clients? Even that, if you're not into the greenwashing that a lot of companies do right now, and you say like, okay, well, actually, I don't care. That is completely fine, as long as you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. If you can, I want to say, except for being racist, because that is never acceptable, you can do anything as long as you know why. And if you have that knowledge, and if you have that trust, again, coming back to the beginning, if you have that trust in yourself and in your purpose and in your raison d'etre, I want to say, why you're in this world, you don't have to run after every trend. You don't have to change your business model every year. You don't have to change your project every 3 months and adjust. You can, you might want to, but you don't have to. And that trust gives so much calmness in the whole process, which you can't get if you don't have your why.
Yeah.
And I want to say that that calmness is what a lot of stressed managers are looking for. So you might want to start there.
Yes, and actually, you at the beginning you said that during the development of the digital strategy, you have to have buy-in from everybody. Especially this idea is coming from the board, then it trickles down to the entire company and the entire organization breathes in it. It's hard. It's so hard, but at least the board and C-level should be committed to the strategy, and this why should be coming from each of them, right?
Yeah. I'm actually not quite sure about the numbers, but if I recall right, you say that in every change process you leave or you lose about 10% of your employees, if I'm right on that numbers. But it is a fairly high number that you lose in general. So the question is, why do you lose them, right? So you can lose them because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know, is their job even safe tomorrow? And especially with automation, that fear is a big fear, where people don't know, do I have a job tomorrow? Or will the change process get rid of it? Or they don't know if they can still keep up with their job after the change process. So you will lose people anyway. But you better might lose them because they decide, okay, the direction we're going, they're clear on the direction, I'm not willing to go with them. And you might rather lose people on that decision because that leaves no bad blood on no side. Mostly you will leave with a like good connection, a good feeling. Both sides will leave with a good feeling because they know, okay, it's like when you change a product that you love and you use, and then they change something. some people tend to say, like, now they change it, now I'm not gonna, and you have that bad feeling in your heart, right? You're like, nah, I don't like them anymore. Or you can be okay and say like, hey, they made the decision, they communicated it, I'm not willing to go with it. Okay, so we're gonna separate here. It's just a feeling that you have with that is a completely different one. And if you communicate clearly to the rest of them who actively decide to go through with the project then and the change project, you have your own company influencers. You have people who are really with you, who really want to follow you for the journey to come, and who probably would give a lot more than they would if you would just put it through to them and say like, this is what we're going to do now.
Just to put it in a very, maybe not a very polite way, my way or highway, sounds like that. Well, I didn't mean, because I strongly believe that people are really the assets of the companies.
Yes.
And today I was reviewing the McKinsey's report, and there was a discussion about the skilling, upskill and reskill that will be required in the next 5-6 years. And the majority, and it was very interesting facts, majority of the organizations, they plan to do upskilling and reskilling with their existing staff.
Yes.
So the McKinsey report tells it's unprecedented finding, and before usually there was more new hires and new blood was coming to the companies, but the trend is changing. So yes. Trend is changing. But to go back to the strategies, so just to have a kind of summary of the 3 top points for you to make digital strategy resilient, what those 3 points would be?
I want to say communication. And I'm going to make this the first point. So communication is everything. Early and often. Don't decide anything in your boardroom and then present everybody else with the ready plan. Communicate early and often. The second thing coming from that is review your plan early and often. Be willing to adjust, be willing to change the road if needed. And the third thing is being clear about why you do this. What is the purpose of that endeavor? What do you want to achieve with it? What is the result that you want to have? And not necessarily in a numbers or functionality way. Yeah.
But business never says it in this way. They always look at the numbers, what the finances are telling us and how it will look like in our finances. And I understand this. We are doing anything to create the business value. So if you are creating digital strategy, it should be bringing the value for business, right? So depends what business value you care for.
I want to say, if you keep to these 3 rules, it will. Because how many plans, and I guess you've been in some of them, how many plans have you figured out and got the budget for it, and then you work on the plan and you pull it through, and at the end of the project you notice that, well, actually we just dumped 1.5 million into the bin because whatever we created actually isn't what we needed. So I want to say, if you keep to the so-called soft skills, I don't think they're so soft after all, but if you keep to the so-called soft skills, that will in the end actually save you money and pay. And so, yeah, and especially if you look back into the Scrum and all the, I want to say Scrum is a good part to do the research because there are business cases out there for it, especially about the idea of adjusting your project on the go. And you see that the numbers are actually lower. And if the numbers aren't lower, the success rates are higher. So you have a benefit of it. Yeah.
And I would add from your words that for doing all this, the C-level will need courage.
Yes. Yes. It takes courage to unlearn what we learned in business school and what we learned in management literature. That takes courage. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any questions from the audience about the strategy? I really enjoyed the conversation. It was very, I find it very interesting to see your point of view, how you envision the resilience and how digital strategy, how to make the digital strategy resilient. So I really appreciate your time. So we are almost done with 1 hour. So again, I would like to encourage everybody who attended and remind that we mutually decided to dedicate today's session to Ukrainian families, and please donate as much as you can to the UNICEF for the kids, children from Ukraine. So I appreciate, Saskia, your time.
Thank you for having me.
I really enjoyed this session. It was interesting discussion, and wish you all the best and success in your future digital strategy developments.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for asking me the tough questions. Also, when I know I might sometimes repeat myself, because I want to say in the end, it's easy, but it's not simple. It's hard to do that sometimes, but it's not too complicated. Yeah, so yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Me too. Thank you for your time. Thank you everybody for attending and for your interest. We will be posting this recording on the YouTube and sharing on our social media. So thank you for your interest. And on 25th, we will have another session. It will be also about the transition. So please follow our LinkedIn and social media events, and we'll be happy to see you on our next events.